Good evening, everyone. This is Tala with Drive-thru Therapy. Thank you guys so much for joining me tonight. And as always, I'm grateful for your support and your emails, for the people that are sending me emails, letting me know where they're at in their journey, and also giving recommendations of which topics or themes they want me to address. It's fantastic. I always appreciate the inspiration. So feel free to send it. My email is talaibra8888@gmail.com, and you can just shoot me an email. It takes me a minute to respond, but I will respond, and I truly appreciate your feedback. All right. Tonight, we're going to talk about boundaries. There's several types of boundaries. So the specific ones I am interested in you guys learning, which are very subtle and confusing if you're not aware of what's happening in the moment when you are with any other human being, or when you are in a relationship, whether it's a friendship, relationship between parents, between family, between a partner. This important boundary plays a very strong part in your emotional well-being, and that's your emotional boundaries. There's different types, like I said. So you got a physical boundary, a sexual boundary, a mental boundary, an emotional boundary, and I'm sure there's other boundaries that I'm missing, but those are the basic ones that I want you to know for tonight. And tonight we're going to talk about one of the most important ones that if you don't understand how it plays out in you, how it is developed in you, then you're going to be absorbing a lot of other people's emotions because you have no boundaries. So an emotional boundary is a limit that we set on how much energy to give or to receive from a relationship, usually dealing with people. An emotional boundary, make sure that it deals with people, because that's where our most absorption of other people's emotions comes in. An example of that, when our partner comes home from work and they're having a rough day, we end up absorbing that, and we want to try to fix it because it impacts us emotionally. We absorb it. And when they have a rough day, we have a rough day. And this eventually becomes a blurred boundary of what are my emotions and what are their emotions, and how much energy I should be putting in to trying to fix them, trying to change their emotional state. And this is with people that we care about and we love, or even strangers. Like if somebody is emotionally, moody, and how that impacts us makes a big difference. And that's what emotional boundaries are really for. Sometimes we have been kind of using this self-deception, this lie towards ourselves, which says that I am just really, sympathizing with them or empathizing with my partner. That's why when they feel this way, I feel that too. But a lot of times I know that's not a good thing, because it results in me attempting to control their mood, which results in a fight most of the time, right? If they're having a rough day, I'm going to try to fix it, and I'm going to try to do it on my time because it impacts me. So this isn't about empathy. This isn't about being kind and generous. This is really about, I want to feel better. And so you got to change the way you feel so I can feel better. And imagine that just blurs up the boundary. And again, we call it being kind. We call it sympathy, empathy. I'm feeling with you, but it's really not that. It's not that kind if we look at it a little closer. It's about controlling the responses of others. And then I can't tell the difference between my feelings or their feelings. And in order for me to feel better, like I said, I have to control what they're doing, control how they feel, control the outcome with them in order for me to feel better. So if you get blurred up in that area, if you don't know how to just kind of maintain your own emotional energy and reserve it and use it wisely and discipline it, is another way to say that too, then eventually it becomes distressing. Your emotional state becomes a fluctuating state with any circumstances that are happening outside of you, and you feel helpless to it because your emotional stability depends on another person's reaction, emotional state, and you fluctuate with them. So one would say this is also codependent, right? But the main criteria for codependence is, again, the lack of emotional boundaries. I don't know what's mine and what's theirs. And the lie I tell myself is that I'm being kind when really I'm not. I'm trying to be controlling of their feelings, you know? In reality, when a person that we love is in a state of emotional distress, they're allowed to be there. They produce their own hormones, think their own thoughts, perceive their own world in a way that brought them to this distress, and for whatever reason. Our job at the most is to, and I'm pushing it here, is to just bear witness to their journey. Sometimes we can, ask if they need help with something, but we want to stop the pattern or the cycle of us reacting or overreacting to other people's emotions. They're allowed to have them. And this is tricky. This is practice. This is constant practice in doing so, especially if that emotional boundary is blurred, because we want to check our motives here. In order for us to change this, we have to be honest with our motives. When I'm attempting to help, and I'm using air quotes here, help someone, is it really helping them, or am I attempting to change the way they feel in order for me to feel better? So we do this on this kind of basic level of, like, let's say if somebody's crying, we quickly go to stopping them from crying or making them look at something positive real quick in order to shut that shit down. But in reality, we need them to cry. This is the more appropriate thing. If they have experienced a loss and they feel sad, they're allowed to cry. But because we're not very good with emotions, a lot of the times we attempt to control another person's response emotionally because we don't know we don't have the space to allow them to feel better. And so this becomes, again, blurred. I become controlling in how I am trying to help, right? The motive is I think I'm helping, but I'm really not helping. I'm attempting to control another person's response because it makes me uncomfortable. So checking your motive is pretty important here in order for us to start developing a boundary that emotionally keeps me safe from absorbing another person's emotion or attempting to change theirs or regulating my emotions based on them. Most of the time, people really resist this idea. They say, well, my wife or my husband is in a bad mood when I walk in and I'm trying to help them. But they're just in a bad mood and they bring me down. They put me in a bad mood too. Now, that is a helpless statement we want to get rid of. They can't get me in a lowered mood. They can't unless I allow it, which is an obvious logical thing to say. But now we're going to get to the nitty gritty of how to make this appropriate change. So where it's not just a logical concept that we never use, but we apply it. We actually apply it with the people that we love. They're allowed to produce any feelings that they have, but I am also allowed to maintain and regulate my own feelings. And it's probably the kindest, the most generous thing to do is that I don't absorb their feelings. I give them the space to have whatever feeling they want to have and react in the way they want to react. And I just kind of make sure that I maintain my emotional stability and do not take responsibility for trying to fix them or think it's my fault. And those are the ways that unfortunately we kind of fall into this habit and eventually not maintain emotional boundaries. So I'm going to talk about the things that more than likely you might be doing if you're experiencing this emotional blurred boundaries with people in relationships. Most of the time it is because of those things that I need you to notice now, and noticed with self-honesty. So you're practicing self-honesty in your conversation with yourself about checking those motives if they're there. If they're there, more than likely, you're going to blur the emotional boundary and you're probably crossing them, theirs and yours. So we want to make sure that you're identifying those things. So number one thing is that most of the time when we are not maintaining an emotional boundary, the first thing is out of fear. So when my partner comes home and they're not doing well and I start to become upset, right? I'm upset because they're in their emotions, and then I start to do passive aggressive things like I'm isolating myself. Now it becomes a competition about who's going to isolate themselves first and who's going to kiss the person's ass first. And like, it gets like that. Trust me when I tell you, it gets like that with couples at times. And so this is also a power struggle. And the emotional boundary here is lost. The first thing I want you to ask yourself is, what am I afraid of? If I just let them have their feelings, their bad day, their frustration, if I just let them have it without it being about me, right? Or turning it about me and then making a competition out of it. What is the fear that stops me from doing that? And you will notice, if you're honest with yourself, there are like 5,000 fears that would make us not put in a boundary, an emotional boundary, and start taking responsibility for another person's feelings. And that would be something like fear of abandonment. If they isolate or withdraw, I don't know how to think of it kindly, like they're having a rough day. I think it's about me. I think it's about me, and I start being upset that they're mad at me. And when I realize that I have done nothing, I'm going to get really angry and then I'll confront them about it. And like, why are you upset? And so they're kind of they don't have that space to be emotionally, whatever they are, like, they're dealing with themselves emotionally, whatever that is, because it's going to be about the other person. It's going to be about me. Like, I'm going to be upset because they're upset, So it's not that kind. Ask yourself what fear is driving that. What fear makes us go in there and overtake responsibility for another person's reactions or responses? You'll find out. There's a fear that I don't have control. There's a fear that I'm not feeling loved or lovable in that moment. So I need reassurance real quickly. And again, this might initiate a fight, or I confront them rather than letting them have their feelings and deal with it, And so this becomes a habit. It's a cycle. And they get upset. I come and I try to save them and I take responsibility for it. And then it becomes a very codependent relationship. And it makes people suffocate in a relationship because we're not allowed our space. We're not allowed our emotional spaces. Emotional boundaries are blurred. And it's like, a lot of couples fights start because of this specific issue. People are not allowed to their feelings, and it becomes about power struggle, whose feelings are going to be more prioritized and important. But how about this? If I start to implement emotional boundaries, then I don't worry about it being a competition, because I'm allowed to have my emotion. They're allowed to have theirs. And even if I'm scared, if I'm afraid, and most people won't admit that it's called a fear, but it is a fear. Go ahead and push yourself to label it as a fear. So this way it does not stay in your shadow, in your subconscious realm. You're consciously aware of it, that I'm afraid that I'm being abandoned. I'm afraid I feel insecurity. I'm afraid that they don't love me anymore. And that's why I try to change them real quick and get my reassurance. But then it just becomes unkind and it develops into a fight. So I hope you're kind of starting to see it a little bit closer, that emotional boundaries really starts off with working on them starts off with labeling your fears. What is it that you're afraid of that makes you jump into taking responsibility for fixing another person's feelings, or you losing your own emotional boundaries, not knowing when to stop, when to kind of retreat and care for your emotional well-being. And you doing that, you actually care for the other person. The second thing that you need to be aware of that makes it difficult for you to set up an emotional boundary would be guilt. This is a big one. This is a hidden subconscious thing as well. Just like fear is. People have a hard time with understanding or revealing what guilt does to them and their decision making. So understanding guilt. So one example would be, an obvious one would be, like, let's say a coworker walks by me and they look at me and I perceive that they might be mad at me and they just walk by. Now, I don't really know all what's going on, but in my head, I start creating this narrative, this story. And I call them stories because they're just really not real. They're based off of my insecurity. I go through it in my head, and I think emotionally now I'm starting to take the responsibility for this by simply finding out why they're mad at me, because I've already bought into the fact that they're mad at me. I assume, and I think this assumption is real. Like, I'm good. I'm a a mind reader and I'm accurate. And I think that this person is mad at me. And I start going through my head, in my head, what did I do wrong? What could I have done wrong? And then I feel a sense of guilt because I think I've done something wrong, rather than this person could be doing anything. They could be just walking by, being pensive, and they're just not aware. But in my head, based on my insecurities, I start kind of taking responsibility. What did I do? And then when I realize, because this feeling of guilt, right, it takes over, and I don't know what to do with it. And if I feel guilt, and I realize I didn't do anything wrong, right? Then now I get angry. Like, how could they do this to me? I didn't do anything wrong. Right? So guilt plays an important role here, and whether you put emotional boundaries or not, because we assume that guilt is a great guide for us to make decisions. We think it's a conscience, your conscience talking to you. But unfortunately, guilt is like any other feeling. It doesn't hold the truth. It's just a feeling telling you where you're at based on your thinking, in that moment. It doesn't mean that it is the truth. So we have to be aware, hyper aware when guilt starts to come in. And then because I don't want to feel guilt because I don't know what I did wrong and why they're responding this way, instead of taking control over my narrative and saying, I'm not accurate, I'm not a mind reader, I don't know what this person may have trouble, trouble that they're going through and they're just pensive. Oh no, it's like we go into developing this narrative and then I feel guilt and shame about what I could have done wrong. And then when I realize I didn't do anything wrong, I get angry at them and I start behaving in some sort of aggressive or passive aggressive way in the workplace towards them. Even my thought pattern, it's emotional boundaries. I've just it's blurred to hell with how much I'm taking responsibility and trying to explain their behavior. I don't think there's anything wrong with that in my head. Like, that is wild. I want us to interrupt this because you are spending too much energy. You're giving too much energy to something that you did not do. You have no reason to take responsibility for and feel guilty about. This person is just has their own emotions. You're not the center of their world. Congratulations. You're not. Please sit and celebrate that, because it will relieve you from having to explain people's intentions, people's emotions, people's whatever. You're not doing all that. You're not in their head. You're not in their experiences. You don't know what's going on. It's only your guilt, your shame, your insecurities, explaining what you're looking at and overtaking responsibility for that, which again blurs up your boundaries. So if you want to make sure that you keep your boundaries intact, when you see a coworker like that and you start to develop these little stories, go ahead and say, stop with the stories. I tell myself that quite a bit. More in the beginning when I started to make changes within myself is like, stop with the stories, Tala. Like, we don't need those stories. They're just stories. And I want you to do the same to yourself. Stop with the stories. They're just stories. They're not real. So understand what guilt does, because guilt turns quickly into anger, and I'm going to react on that guilt, which turns into anger. So I'm going to do something, whether I isolate or I'm a little snippy with them, whatever it is I'm going to do. I don't know how to handle emotional boundaries. I have none at this point. If I'm just overtaking responsibility for all that, I hope you see it. I hope you see its detrimental value. Okay. So it's not just a little bit. It's a lot what we do, but sometimes we normalize it. Like, I'm being nice when I read their intentions and their motives, and I don't let them tell me. I'm doing it for them. How is that kind? How is that sympathy or empathy? How is that? That's just based off of my insecurity, my needs for reassurance, my need for validation. And it's making me come up with stories, and then I'm taking responsibility and feel guilty about it. They didn't tell me to do any of that. I'm doing that on my own. Please wake up out of this. We don't need that. We don't need that. It's not yours to fix. It's not yours to fix. So allow the person the space by understanding how guilt works in your psyche and what it does. Now, talked about fear. We talked about guilt. The third thing I want to make sure that you understand when you are developing and maintaining your emotional boundaries is that most of the time when we have kind of started this narrative in our head. There's fear-driven thoughts. There is a lot of obsessive thoughts regarding guilt and what I'm overtaking responsibility for this person's reactions or behaviors towards me. Then, of course, because it's a habitual thought process. It's an habitual obsessive thought process that I'm engaging in. And usually there comes a compulsive reaction after. So I have this obsessive thought pattern, and then there's going to be a compulsive act towards it. Now, this compulsive act may be a very large one where you can actually see it. It's a physical one, or an internal one where I'm just withdrawing from people, which results also in like silent treatment towards others because I have this developed narrative and I'm just upset and because this other person's upset and I just start doing things like that or slamming doors. Well, actually, that's more of the physical, right? So we have the internal, development of a compulsive act as well as the external development of a compulsive act that helps relieve this anxiety or this obsession. So sometimes I will try to confront them about their behavior. Why are they doing this? And they're leaving me out when they're upset. Why are you treating me like this? So we're confronting them. And then it starts to fight. And to some extent, dare I say it, you get your validation from that. So it becomes a relief. A relief to your anxiety. So you start burning yourself up on the inside with this obsessive thoughts, right? I'm not loved. This person is upset. They're mad at me and it's making it all about me. I'm making it all about me. And then to relieve this, I go and confront them or I talk about them or I do some sort of action, compulsive action to relieve this anxiety. And although it relieves it temporary, it's going to now happen again and again. I'm going to use the same pathway, neurological pathway to solve this problem. Now I've established one. The more I keep repeating it, it becomes a compulsive act, an obsessive and compulsive act. So don't worry about it being a disorder of OCD. We do a lot of obsessive and compulsive responses that have nothing to do with just a disorder. It's a simple human response. We obsess about something in order for us to relieve our obsession. Sometimes we develop a compulsive act to relieve that obsession instead of working on the obsession itself. This is the problem. If I continue to compulsively act to feel better on the inside, so whether I confront that person, try to control this outcome, control their behavior, walk out, do whatever it is that I think I'm reacting to, that's based on my ability to regulate or not regulate my emotions, what's going to end up happening is that I'm going to set my reputation with the other person. They're going to see what I'm about at this point, even though I don't want to consciously do that. So it's important at this point to make sure that you're not acting compulsively anymore. Whatever you're about to do to temporarily relieve this anxiety, which is start a fight with your partner, which is confront them or confront what you think that threatening behavior is, make sure that you take responsibility for how you feel. How you feel is something that you've done. It's not necessarily what the other person has done. You're the one producing the hormones. You're the one thinking those thoughts as you are looking at them and interpreting their behavior. You're the one doing a lot of work. Make sure that you take responsibility first before you start compulsively reacting in a way to control whatever you think is a problem, controlling them in order for you to feel better. Make sure that you start to feel better on the inside, checking and challenging your thought patterns, making sure that whatever you're about to do, stop it from happening compulsively, which is going to be a little tricky because you're used to doing it to relieve anxiety. And now we're going to stop the compulsive reaction. We need to be very aware of this. So this way you can get your emotional regulation back. You're the one who's in charge of your emotional regulation and your emotional boundaries. But when you give them away, then it feels out of control. Then your emotions feel out of control. And then I start blaming other people and wanting to control other people or gossip about them or talk about them or create problems, even bigger problems as a way to relieve anxiety or to control the outcomes. But all of it is just, you have a problem and you're solving it. And in the way you're solving it, it causes another problem. Because in fact, the problem starts on the inside. I'm the one who's kind of lighting this fire up on the inside and it just burns me. And we need to put it out on the inside. We don't need to go outside and put it out. We need to put it out on the inside. That's where it started. That's where the fire started. I hope this helps you start to understand emotional boundaries and why they're important. and how they're important to your emotional well-being and stability. Because when I don't have emotional boundaries, then I am feeling helpless towards my emotions, and I think people are in control of them, or situations outside of me are in control of my emotional stability. And then that's going to make me jump outside my body and try to control other people in whatever way compulsively that I'm going to do it. So I hope this helps today in understanding emotional boundaries and understanding that true kindness and true compassion, this goes for me too. I could lose myself if I'm not consciously aware of my fears, my guilt, my insecurities, all those things. I could start behaving in ways I can't take back. And that eventually, if I just keep repeating those compulsive reactions, it just becomes a part of my reputation. That's what people are going to know me for. So we're constantly working on this. No, don't worry about expecting perfection. Just keep working on it. And it gets better and better the more you work on it. You may not be able to catch it every time, but just know that change isn't about perfection. If you're trying to look at change as perfection, you're going to have a hard time changing, because sometimes we're going to get it right. Sometimes you guys, we're going to miss the mark, but that's okay. That's okay. Give yourself the flexibility to get the things right sometimes, and sometimes not get them right, but learn from them. Learn to do them better next time. That's okay. That's what this is about. This idea of perfection that it needs to be perfect the first time I do it. Oh man, this is just torment to whoever sets that rule on themselves, is that it has to be perfect. And if it's not perfect, I sit in the shame and the guilt, which makes it very difficult to change, friends. Very difficult, because we've got no space for flexibility to learn. We need to learn. And the more that you work on the space and allow the space for you to learn, and like, hey, sometimes I don't get it right, but I'm going to keep trying. That's great. It gets better, friends. It gets better. And you take more and more responsibility for how you feel. And it becomes a more defined boundary of what your feelings are and what another person's feelings are. And again, going back to true kindness, that becomes truly compassionate and kind. People are allowed to be whatever they want to be emotionally in front of you. It's not a threat to you anymore. And it doesn't change who you are and what you stand for and your value system. And you just allow them the space, because now you have a lot of emotional space on the inside for yourself, and that you're able to regulate your own emotions. You don't need to regulate anybody else to feel better. Isn't that beautiful? I want you to really look at it this way. Change the idea of what true kindness is. Unless a person is asking you for help, please sit back, allow them their emotions, allow them their thoughts. Do not try to assess them, develop any ideas about them, or assume that you know what they are, those thoughts and feelings, because it's not kind. It's not kind. It's for your own selfish benefit. Make sure that you know the difference between kindness and control, because there's a very thin line. We really think that when we're attempting to control another person's emotion, we're being kind. That's a lie. Go ahead and stop, and let's get it back to people are allowed to have their space. And if it wasn't there before, that's fine. We're going to make space for ourselves as well as them. They're allowed to feel whatever they want. I don't go into interpreting their feelings. I stay very good with my emotional boundaries. It doesn't get blurred for me. I work on defining it. And this is a gradual definition, friends. But make sure that you listen to this episode as much as you can to implement those ideas and concepts into your daily functioning. This will relieve you from a lot of pressure, because if your emotional boundaries are blurred in relationships, it's blurred in most relationships, not just like one person or two. Character wise, it's consistent. Your personality is consistent. So a consistent behavior in this and all those areas. You're going to be overtaking responsibility for people's reactions in all of those areas, which is torment on you. It's a lot of work. It's going to result in exhaustion, and nobody's paying you for that. Nobody's going to reward you for that, friends. It's just going to interfere and sabotage your emotional well-being. Hopefully this helps you. Listen to this episode over and over again. It's one of those. Actually, it's all of my episodes. They're made in a way where I'm just putting them in the background, and my subconscious is taking the suggestions. I'm placing those suggestions in there for you. So even if you're not really consciously listening, your subconscious is always listening. So make sure that you're putting it in the background when you're working out, whatever the case is, or when you're sleeping, even better. at night, before you fall asleep, sleep to my voice. The kind of placing those suggestions, because your subconscious is always listening. And at night, it doesn't discriminate. Unlike when we're awake, I discriminate depending on the information I'm getting. I can actually have opinions about the information, whether it's going to work or not work. But your subconscious at night, when you're not consciously aware, your subconscious is not going to discriminate. It will accept the suggestion for the most part. So that's kind of the secrets of how I get to program new ideas and new thought patterns. This is how I do it. So please use these episodes because they're made just for that. Just for that. Thank you so much for joining me tonight on another episode. I'm sending you love and light. And as Viktor Frankl said, a human being is a deciding being. You have the power to decide on what you want to do with your emotions. This has been an episode of Drive-thru.